All right, so a social worker walks up to a patient and says, "Do you have the time?" And the patient says, "I'm so sorry, I don't have a watch." And the social worker says, "It's fine, it's not a problem. The main thing is we got to talk about it." I trialled that joke with my colleagues about half an hour ago and they said it was a social work dad joke, so I thought I'd give it a go. All right. So my name is Rob. I'm one of the two social workers at the Mid-North Coast Cancer Institute. The other social worker is Mira, who you may have met. Jane's explained MNCCI very well, but it's effectively we provide our oncology services, radiation oncology, medical oncology, and haematology, not to forget. And I mean, if you stood on the roof of this building, you'd see our building. It's just about 500 metres over there. So I suppose the big question is, what does a social worker do? It's a good question, because a lot of people who I work with don't really understand what I do. And I mean, Dr. Lethal, Carrie, may have given you a different explanation of what a social worker does as to what I think I do. It's a very broad role, and social workers do a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. The social workers running around all over the community doing all sorts of things, but it's quite specific in oncology. And I like to kind of put it in two baskets, really. On one hand, we provide the practical support. So it's just the day-to-day things that come up when you're going through cancer, whether it's breast cancer or any cancer. And those practical things, I mean, at their most basic, is just making sure you can actually get to the centre. You can actually get to treatment. And you might think, oh, really? But when you live in a regional area, it's actually a bit of a big deal, really. Can you get to the MNCCI? Other practical things we deal with, a lot of things around housing, and at the moment, risk of homelessness and even homelessness. We do a lot of liaison work with Centrelink. If you need help in the home, if you're struggling with things day to day, just the things you need to do, especially for older patients, that are looking to access aged care services, we can advocate for those services we put in place. I think it's worth mentioning at the pointier end of what we do, we are still social workers, and we are there to help if it comes up in an oncology context in regard to child protection issues, elder abuse, domestic violence, those kind of things, issues around addiction. So the social worker also looks after that. So that's one side of what we do. The other side of what we do is the emotional support. And we provide, or Mira and I, provide an oncology-specific counselling service. So we're not psychologists, but we are trained to provide oncology counselling. And that's just the ability to really talk about what's going on, what's happening in your life, and help with some emotional coping strategies that you can put in place to help going forward. And we can catch up with patients sometimes just once, or sometimes for a couple of weeks. And some patients we will see for months, and we might catch up with them again a year after they've finished treatment in that kind of survivorship phase. So social workers are, I think, from my perspective, it's that practical support, but it's the emotional support as well. But I'm here to talk about certainly a very practical issue, and that's the financial impact of cancer, and in particular breast cancer. Now, I'll acknowledge, of course, we have Medicare in Australia, and it's great, it really is. So when you compare kind of what we have in Australia to what happens perhaps in other countries, Medicare is pretty good. And in my experience, certainly from MNCCI, it covers the overwhelming majority of the pure medical costs when you're going through cancer. It's not often that someone is referred to me because there's an out-of-pocket, purely medical expense. And if they were, it would be referred to me because, I tend to find out and I try and help out. So the purely medical expenses, yes, the majority are covered by Medicare. Every now and then, there might be a scan that is not covered. We used to have one in particular that the surgeons used to like to have, kind of to look at, but it wasn't covered by Medicare, but that is now covered. So I don't see that very often. But I think it's important to acknowledge, though, that there's lots of other costs that come alongside cancer that are not covered. And these costs can be very significant. They really can. Studies have been done, and I read one on your website, actually, that said in the first 5 years after diagnosis of breast cancer, you're likely to incur up to, or on average, $5,000 worth of out-of-pocket expenses. It's a lot of money, it is. I think it's hard to quantify these exact figures because it changes from patient to patient, centre to centre, region, metropolitan, rural, remote. But we acknowledge the costs are there. And I think the main reason from where I stand is these costs are there because cancer was never part of the plan for anyone. No one saw this coming. No one plans financially just in case I have cancer, do they really? So when it does happen, it can really turn things upside down, and especially financially. All right. I think it's also important to acknowledge that we are living in what the media calls at the moment a cost of living crisis. And I would agree. I think we are living in really tough times financially. You only need to go to the supermarket to see how much groceries are. Petrol has gone up. And of course the big one is rents and mortgages are just going up and up and up. So the costs are there. And so if you're looking at this kind of cost of living crisis and then a cancer diagnosis on top of that, it's a bit of a double whammy really. And people are doing it pretty tough. One of the things that I see, which I find upsetting to see, is when the financial stress of cancer is felt more than the cancer itself. People are more stressed about keeping their head above water financially than the actual thing they're trying to fight, the cancer. Because right now they need to actually afford groceries and petrol and their rent. And I've seen patients that have said, well, I've got to put cancer on the back burner because I need some money. So, and I've seen that, in the 8 years that I've been there. So, all right, so what kind of costs are we talking about? Well, what do I see? The big one I've got to say is travel. The big cost is travel. I suppose you think you're in a metropolitan centre, Sydney, Brisbane, Melbourne, Adelaide, Darwin, Perth, it's not going to be so present because you've got lots of big hospitals servicing that area that you can travel to. But once you start going to a regional area like Coffs, or this general area, the travel costs can be significant. Think about someone travelling from Grafton for radiotherapy, because they don't do radiotherapy up there, they do a bit of chemo, but not radiotherapy. So they're coming in 5 days a week for 7 weeks, and they're travelling up to 1,000 kilometres a week. That's huge. That is absolutely massive. The petrol cost involved in that is just enormous, and people just don't have the money for it. So travel, or if you have to go to Sydney, for surgery to see a doctor, whatever it happens to be. Stepping away from that a bit, I don't know if anyone in this room applies, but when you're heading out to kind of what we call rural, going to Guyra, beyond Armidale, you're still having to come into a centre like ours to have your treatment. And I think we should bear in mind, our fellow citizens that are travelling huge distances. I was reading about someone that was in Kununurra, fellow Australian citizen, living in, it's Western Australia, isn't it? Yeah, Western Australia. They're 900 kilometres from their treatment centre. That is just enormous. All right, so travel costs. I would like to say, though, I have never had a patient that couldn't get where they needed to go because of the cost. Not even once. In 8 years, we always find a way, every single time. We get creative as to how we find a way, but we always find a way to make sure that our patients get where they need to go for the treatment they need to have. All right, what other costs are we talking about? Well, we're talking about garments, so lymphedema garments, post-surgery. These things are quite expensive, that's not covered. Home modifications, if for whatever reason you need modifications to your home, so you can get in the shower, get in and out of the house, that's expensive. Mobility aids, doctors that don't bulk bill, that's the reality of it. There are less and less GPs these days that will bulk bill, and if you're seeing a GP regularly during your illness, then that can really add up. The cost of other therapies like psychological interventions, counselling. If you're doing that outside of a mental health care plan, that's expensive. Nutritional expenses. When you're going through cancer, you want to eat the best food. You want to put the best stuff in your body. Good food is expensive. And things like nutritional supplements that our dietitians might recommend, that's another cost. Exercise programs outside of what we might be able to fund. Increased power bills to make sure a house is kind of where it needs to be temperature-wise. And of course the big one undoubtedly is work disruption. All right, so whilst there's costs, on the other side of it, there's also the fact that you might not be able to work. Less of an issue, obviously, for our patients that are retired. But if you are working, up until your date of diagnosis, then that's a massive hit. To have increased costs and not be able to work, that's a big one to be able to deal with. All right. So there's lots of costs involved that you don't necessarily anticipate. So what can we do about it? Where's the good news? I've got the good news. So I'm not going to name names of the organisations we use because the ones we use here are quite specific to our region, Coffs Harbour. And so I don't want someone that's outside this region to think, I could contact them. But what I can tell you is that what we have in Coffs Harbour is likely replicated in another area. So wherever you go, you're likely to find the same kind of services under a different name or a different organisation. So I'm running out of time a little, but I'll go through them quickly. So things like IPTAS, the Isolated Patients Transport Assistance Accommodation Scheme, is there to reimburse you for your travel costs. And the reimbursements are significant, 40 cents in the kilometre. If you travel 100 kilometres, you get $40 back. And that scheme is replicated throughout Australia. I don't know about the reimbursement rates, but the schemes exist in all states. All right. So IPTAS, something I talk about a lot with my patients. Charitable organisations are out there, and they exist in all the regions that I have kind of dealt with that want to be able to help. We have an amazing organisation for this region, Coffs, Clarence, kind of Nambucca Valley. No, really? We have the Can Do Cancer Trust. Okay, we have the Can Do Cancer Trust, and they're so incredible. Well, you are so incredible. Fundraising tirelessly to be able to provide immediate financial assistance to patients that are doing it tough. And that is done through the social workers. So we kind of contact Can Do and we facilitate the assistance. There's utility bill relief programs. There are pro bono programs out there. So there's free professional services for things you might need. So pro bono legal programs if you need to speak to a lawyer, especially if you want to get that kind of future planning squared away, which we're all recommended we do, no matter what our age or health status. Getting your advanced care, not advanced care directive, that's done with a GP usually, but your power of attorney, enduring guardian, and will done, if that's something you want to do. There's pro bono services there. There are pro bono financial counselling services, and I think that's a really good one to bear in mind. Someone to sit down with you and kind of put all your ducks in a row and figure out where you can save money, where you can access support, and how you can plan financially. There are lots of non-government organisations out there that want to be able to help. And even in our community, I know there's a church we have locally that really wants to be able to help, and they'll contact me every now and then, and they'll say, is there someone that needs a bit of assistance? And we'll say, yes, actually, and we link them in. Around Christmas, they get in touch with me and say, look, we've got a whole lot of food hampers, and we've got some vouchers so that they can go out and buy some Christmas presents for their kids. The help is out there. And of course, the big one that I'll be remiss without mentioning is Centrelink. All right. I know if you have never dealt with Centrelink before and all of a sudden now you need to, it can be really daunting and a bit terrifying. But we're very well versed in the whole Centrelink thing. We know what the application processes are. I mean, I don't work for Centrelink, but I know kind of how to apply, what kind of supporting evidence you need, and we can help you through that process. All right. And I've run out of time. So if there's one take-home, your take-home for today, one take-home, one thing to remember for you or anyone you know with any kind of cancer, if they're going through financial hardship during their cancer journey, ask to see the social worker. Right? Ask to see the social worker because we know what supports are out there and we can link you in with them. All right? So we can work with you to make sure you've got all the support that might be available to you because we know what's there. All right? So ask for the social worker. All right.